It's so bleak. It's bleak for so many reasons. The inevitability of it is so upsetting. Of course, we knew this was going to happen. He disappeared when he was moved to the most recent prison. He disappeared for 2 weeks. Nobody knew where he
Yeah.
was because he had to kind of travail thousands of miles to this other prison. There was a degree of inevitability about it then. There was inevitability about it in 2020 when he was poisoned and he recovered in Germany and decided to go home. We kind of knew this was coming, but it's such a blow to the opposition. It's such a blow to young people, of course, who make up the large proportion of his followers. It's very much a warning to young people, which is so dispiriting.
With the huge news of yesterday, which was the death of the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny in Russian custody. Navalny, a well-known global figure. They had poisoned him before, of course, and he responded by making one of his poisoners confess on tape in a sort of fantastic geopolitical prank. And then he went back to Russia, preferring prison to exile, even though he knew what his fate would presumably likely be. It's almost sort of hard to know where to start with this, except for to say that it's a reminder, Sally, that politics in some countries can be a lot higher stakes than politics here, right?
I mean, it's the bleakest, but also in some ways the most kind of humbling and inspiring news story I can think of. Yes, so Navalny declared unconfirmed, but I think we can assume it's correct, dead by prison staff in his horrible sort of outpost where he was moved just before Christmas. It feels like they moved him, I think they moved him at the end of November to this sort of hellish kind of gulag-style prison. And now he's died suddenly, having been right as rain the day before, went to exercise in prison grounds, was taken ill, and then by the time medical professionals arrived, was not revivable. They have announced his death and said that details will be forthcoming. I think we can assume
once they've made them up.
Once they've workshopped those. It's so bleak. It's bleak for so many reasons. The inevitability of it is so upsetting. Of course, we knew this was going to happen. He disappeared when he was moved to the most recent prison. He disappeared for 2 weeks. Nobody knew where he was because he had to kind of travail thousands of miles to this other prison. There was a degree of inevitability about it then. There was inevitability about it in 2020 when he was poisoned and he recovered in Germany and decided to go home. We kind of knew this was coming, but it's such a blow to the opposition. It's such a blow to young people, of course, who make up the large proportion of his followers. It's very much a warning to young people, which is so dispiriting. But also what I get from it, apart from just such sadness for him and his extraordinary wife, Yulia, who made the speech yesterday, is this sort of unfathomable bravery of recovering for all those months in Germany. He was put into an induced coma, having been poisoned by Novichok. And when he came to and was in decent enough health, he said, I'm going back to Russia because I won't be one of those politicians who's out of touch and who isn't there suffering what the people are suffering. This is my job. I'm going home. Knowing full well that he was probably going to be imprisoned as soon as he landed, which indeed he was, and has been there ever since, and probably, ultimately, that this would happen. And the bravery of it, I can't compute that level of bravery, dignity, courage. It's just extraordinary to me that he would do that.
Jeff, that part of this whole sort of horrendous narrative, but the fact when he was there in Germany, he was free. He was at liberty. They had just tried to kill him. It was not in any doubt, and he chose to return over exile. It sort of gives you shivers, doesn't it?
It does a bit, particularly when we've got sort of two main leaders that are kind of scrabbling around, looking at focus groups, trying to maintain poll leads, trying to say whatever it takes to recover. There's a real issue of conviction there, that is to be admired. I think what's interesting about this is I was on radio yesterday when the news broke, and they were sort of saying, well, you should say that we maybe could read between the lines as to what had happened. I thought, I don't think there's more than one line here. I think it seems fairly transparent to the entire planet. And it's also something that I'm not sure that Putin would have done, a year or so ago with the Ukrainian counter-offensive. It's very much a sign of how his fortunes have changed. And it could be a little bit frustrating when you sort of think about what Putin is. It's a authoritarian, probably sort of quasi-fascist regime. You think, well, why don't the Russian people rise up? The problem is that, I guess they look across liberal democracies in the West and they maybe look at that as a potential alternative, and they don't maybe see they don't maybe see as much stability there. But you know, it's interesting. It's one of those things that right now seems like a power play, but in the passage of time, it could be a moment of hubris that lights the spark for something else.
Jeff, the present company accepted, obviously, but what is this thing that's going on with bits of the Western right and Vladimir Putin, the kind of the sort of huge pull that some people on the right seem to feel for Putin? You know, you had the American journalist, after a fashion, Tucker Carlson, there this week. You know, Trump is forever praising Putin, which we'll go on to talk about in a minute, obviously. But what's the thing there? Is it just simply the sort of macho image of strength, or what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, isn't it? It just shows what social media can do to people. Is that for them, sort of Putin passes the macho vibe check. You know, it's more about just, well, he makes decisions, but what are the decisions, right? Yeah, but he makes them and he sticks to them. But a lot of people die and live in very difficult circumstances. So I think that there's something to be said for, we all want politicians with a bit more conviction, but I think also there's a shot across the bows is that too much conviction is sort of where fascism starts.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Sally, the thing that makes me always so in awe of the Russian opposition, and I don't know Russia brilliantly. I've been there a few times. I met quite a lot of sort of young, politically savvy Russian activists in my various trips there. Is that it's possible to have a decent life in Russia at the moment? It's not. I mean, there is oppression, but it's not like you're living in squalor and crushed. It's possible to have a decent, not super unfree life for a lot of people, and so that means the sacrifice you're inevitably making in going up against the regime is huge, and it fills me with awe every time.
It's astonishing. I mean, the most brutal prisons imaginable, the most unfair legal system, particularly with these sorts of people, the trumped up charges that he faced and was then convicted of. He saw his sentence go, I think, from a 2-year suspended sentence to 19 years to 29 years or something in jail. There was just no hope. And I think, you know, we're even talking now about people not being able to attend a funeral for fear of punishment. And so, yes, you can live a decent life, but it's not a free life because you can't express how you feel freely. It's so deeply upsetting. And I suppose the optimist in me wants to also view this absolutely terrible, bleak, shattering blow to the opposition in Russia as quite a frightened and insecure thing to do. You know, it's edgy. It's a slightly edgy thing of Putin to do, I think. And yes, of course, it's had devastating consequences, and he can do what he likes, as we've learned, and nothing will really happen to him as a result. However, it doesn't look like a big man to me, you know. And
well, I mean, that's I sort of wonder about. I mean, there's the impunity to it, you know, that is there, which is sort of how it's the kind of. It's the sort of the nod from Putin that goes, I'm not going to play by your rules. I'm not going to care what you say. You know, this is what I will do if I wish to do it. Jeff, we also had at the start of this week Donald Trump, you know, running to be president again, saying that if NATO countries didn't start paying their way, he wouldn't just not defend them. He'd encourage Putin to attack them. And it's like. I mean, look, Trump says the whole thing about Trump. You ought to take him seriously, not literally, you know. And he does say the unsayable in order to make a political point. Yes, it's true that many countries should be paying more into NATO. I think Britain is one of the few that even nearly pays its way. Nonetheless, to threaten your allies with the fact that you're going to encourage somebody else to invade them. I mean, what's going on there? Do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's unsettling. You're right, there is a bit of context. When it said Donald Trump said at a conference, it sort of reminds me of Dad said after 6 pints.
Yes.
Now, it's not that he didn't mean it at all, but there was certainly an environment in which he said it. I mean, the issue is I suppose, if you look at how worrying the things are that Donald Trump says, and they are worrying, versus how worrying it is, you know, Russian aggression in Europe. The greatest bulwark against Russian aggression is actually greater defence spending in Europe. So if you wanted to be sort of tangential about it, whatever it takes to get European countries to up their spending, then that would possibly be welcome. But Trump doesn't like a lot of aspects of NATO. I suppose the only reassurance is they passed a law, which is that Congress needs a 2/3 majority to withdraw from NATO. And I don't think that they're ever going to get that. But it doesn't do much for global stability when he's talking about delinquents and bring the, you know, sort of attack them. But it's what goes with the territory of Trump being in politics. And this is what he can do from the sidelines.
I mean, the thing, Sally, that always gives me the most fear about Donald Trump is that he simply doesn't seem to believe in or support the kind of the post-war settlement that's kept the world, at least Europe at any rate, relatively speaking, at peace for over half a century. He just doesn't seem to be into it.
That's absolutely true, but it's broader than that. He doesn't like allyship. He's not into allyship. He just wants them to be on their own. Of course, he doesn't seem to have factored in that America is heavily reliant on access in Europe. So the countries he's suggesting Russia invades, he actually really quite badly needs them. But he will just say anything. I'm concerned by this. Well, you know what he's like. We have to kind of build in a mesh of irony, stupidity, sarcasm, hubris or whatever into everything he says. But there's every likelihood he is going to be leader of the free world in, sometime soon. So it's absolutely terrifying. And one thing I was quite reassured by yesterday with the terrible events in Russia is that Lord Cameron did come down on hard. European leaders came down on it hard. I'm expecting Trump to be a bit he was a very corrupt man. You can't believe everything. That's what we'll get. I believe in innocent until proven guilty. It'll be all that. He won't actually condemn Putin for having done it.
And yet he is a man who talks about jailing his political opponents with glee.
Yeah.
It's part of his campaign rhetoric. Anyway, look, we've had a bunch of people getting in touch. Nick in Cardiff says, if the right admires Putin's strength and machismo, if we can get Putin to stick a pinky out while sipping a cup of tea, can the right start backing Ukraine again? Thank you, Nick. Good point, well made. Whereas Martin points out the reason Russians don't rise up against Putin is that they're scared of the consequences. Yeah. Quite right. Indeed, you can see it. Look, keep getting in touch with us this morning, please. You can text us on 87222. Start your message with the word Times. You can tweet us at Times Radio or using the hashtag Times Radio, or email us on studio@times.radio. And of course, it wouldn't be right to discuss all this without remembering our colleague Evan Gershkovich from the Wall Street Journal, who is still in captivity in Russia for no crime other than journalism. So we are, of course, thinking of him.